Peaceful Palette Art Lesson Series. I am Noelle Rollins and I'm so happy you're here. Today we are going to work on shading ears. So I am going to be using some drawing pencils. These are 2H and an 8B pencil, as well as some blenders. If you have a blender, use that. If not, use a cotton swab. Just grab a little handful of them and an eraser. This is one that just came with my drawing pencil set. If you do not have drawing pencils, you can go ahead and use a basic, number 2 pencil, school pencil, something like that. If you do have access to purchase a drawing pencil set, I highly recommend it. You can find them anywhere from Walmart to Michael's to dickblick.com, Amazon, places like that. So let's get started, just showing how we can really show off all the fun folds and features of the ears by just relaxing today and having a good time doing some drawing. All right, let's get started.
Okay, so I have a few ears here. Before we get started shading, I thought let's just go over the shapes of the ears. So I'm going to go over with pen to make it clear, just to start showing some of the different things to look for on the ears. So the outer shape is a little different on each ear, as you can see as well. And if I was doing a line drawing of this, what I'm saying there is I wouldn't draw too much of that front part of the ear where it connects. We can leave that more just implied. But then how you choose to draw these inner parts is what's really going to set your drawing apart when you're doing a line drawing. So I tend to not show every shadow unless it needs to be a very detailed drawing. And now this one is just a little bit less contrast in the creases, at least the folds in that back part of the ear. So I would show that first crease, go down. As you can see, the way people's ears align into their eardrum area is a little different as well. And so that'll be all something that you'll capture in your drawings. It's just important to recognize that not all ears look the same, which can set us up for a lot of frustration when we're shading if we are just expecting them or we're guessing at how they look. We never want to assume how an ear looks, and our eye sometimes wants to trick us, or our brain does, on what we actually see. It'll sometimes fill in the gaps with what we think it sees. So we're just going to do a few of these here. Do these 3 and then a couple more, and then we'll get started shading. Keeping the lines pretty simple there. Noticing how those different shapes change. I always try to look at where the widest part of the ear is. That helps me when I'm drawing it later. Each one of these has a little bit higher widest point. And if you're doing more detail, you'd go in and you could use that cross-hatching method to kind of imply a little bit more with your drawing. Feeling a little bit more sketchy line drawing. Just depending how much detail you want to have. There's no perfect answer here. It's just, if you're doing a line drawing, if you're doing more of a cartoon style, if you're doing a realistic line drawing, of course, all of that will affect the overall look and how much effort or detail you want to show on your artwork. So here are just a couple more, and we'll go over quickly. So it's not important to know every part of the ear by name. If I was all technical, I would have learned all that, but truthfully, I've made it this far. If you have piercings or things like that, you probably know more what the different parts are called. So we're kind of showing where it attaches there to the head and just paying attention to where the lobe is detached versus attached. More when we're doing shadowing and as part of a larger portrait, that'll be implied a little bit more. So if you want practice drawing ears, you could pull pictures out of a magazine, copy off some old photos, take a few photos of your own ear and print them out. It's just a fun exercise. Each ear is different, as you can see. And these are just a small sampling of ear shapes and types. There's so many options depending on what level of detail, of course, you'd want to show here. Okay, so here is the ear that we are going to sketch out and shade. So I have my drawing pencils. I'm going to start with the lighter one, the 2H. That has a harder pencil lead. What I've noticed when I'm drawing ears is I like to not start on the outer part. So I'm starting with this inner fold right within the outer part of the ear. What happens if I start with the outer part, I inevitably don't have enough spots along the way to look at where my width is correct, or I'll make it too large, too wide, etc. So if I have a little bit of the finer details that I can start with, it kind of gives me a good starting point. So again, when we're doing these parts, you really want to see what the widest part is. Is that lobe hanging or attached? Here I'm keeping an eye on how this comes into the lobe. Up, I have chickens and ducks outside my window. They're saying hello. If you hear that, that's Amber. Okay, so now we're going to do this part where it starts to curve and swirl towards the eardrum. And I'm doing all of this very light, so for exactly this reason, we can go in and erase and change as we need. There's no reason to put the pressure on yourself that it has to be perfect. Keep a light hand with light pressure. So here I'm looking about, is that about halfway down? That helps me just gauge that I'm in the right spot. Again, we could do the grid method for this. You could do the lightboard method that we showed in the first couple videos of the series, where I use it in reference to an eye. But for something like an ear, and where our main focus is practicing the drawing and the shading, I encourage you to work on the drawing part here. At any point during this video, you can pause and catch up. Just make sure you don't get caught up in trying to make sure everything is perfect. Here I start to look and I see that those 3 bumps on the right, how they line up, how the eardrum lines up. I see that that bottom part of the opening goes out a little bit further right than the eardrum hole. I'll move that over, connect those. You can see the three parts are all pretty much in a line on the right there. So once I make sure that I have this all pretty much set up in the right way, you can come in with your darker pencil and start with the darkest spots, which is of course going to be this part where the ear opens up into the inner ear. So you want to make sure that your pencils are sharp. And I'm just doing very light circular motions. And then this next part is a little less dark, but we'll still go ahead and with medium pressure. And fill that in. Ears are a great thing to practice drawing. It really helps you get control on your pencil, get familiar with how you hold the pencil, what works for you. And they're pretty, like there's a beginning and an end. Some of the other features, there's so many details that it can be a little overwhelming. And it feels like there's less pressure on the ears. You want to get it right just for pure artistic practice, but very few people are going to notice if they're a little off. So I prefer laying out some of these darker spots first. That lets me set up the right amount of contrast, making sure that my entire drawing doesn't end up too light. It helps me see everything a little more clearly too. Sometimes what can happen is we start shading and we sort of cover our lines with shading, and we don't want that to happen. So if we can show these darkest spots first, then we make sure those lines are captured. The ear is also one of the few features that actually has straight lines, or I shouldn't say straight, but hard lines, where you can just do lines with your pencil in a curved way without feeling like you're going to ruin how the overall effect looks. On all of the other parts where the ear is more gently curving forward and away from us, I tend to do little circles, but on these harder creases, it's nice to be able to just put a solid curved line there. So now that we have some of those darker parts shaded and drawn, we can come in here with a little bit lighter touch and start filling in some of these areas. So using medium to firm pressure and a lot of little circles just over and over, working to shade under this flap that kind of comes out and creates a shadow there. So we're doing two things. We're shading where that ear, I should know the name of this, flap, overhang, whatever you want to call it, comes out. And also how that part of the ear curves a little, has a little bit of an indent there. So we're making sure to capture both parts of that. We're also looking to see when the highlights are the brightest, so we can capture what is the lightest part of this ear. And we want to make sure to have that stand out as the brightest, so there's enough contrast. And I've mentioned this in other shading videos, but I'll mention it here as well. When we're doing shading like this, I talk about wanting to have the brightest part, the highlights, the lowlights. But in comparison to the rest of the portrait you may be working on, this brightest part of the ear may still not be brighter than the highlights on the eye or the nose or the little highlights on the lips. And so if you're doing this in conjunction with other features also being shown, part of a larger portrait, you'll want to make sure that you have this proper shading in comparison to those other features. So since none of these are bright white, this whole ear would probably be a little bit darker than the other features shown. So now we're just going along this outer section here, which, as you can tell, is a little bit darker than the inner part. So we'll go ahead and make sure that that's all shaded a little bit more than that inner section. Are we going to continue drawing like we don't hear a chicken in the background? Yes, we're going to continue drawing. Although I will add, if you've ever contemplated getting chickens or ducks and you're in a place where you can do it, I highly recommend. They are the funniest things, and they do this song and dance that they're doing right now. I think often when one of them lays an egg, and then they kind of come out from wherever they've been, and they're like, "Hey, everybody, where's everybody at? I just did something awesome." So they keep doing that until they kind of spot their rest of their group. All right. So we'll continue here. So notice on the lobe, it doesn't just end straight. You have to show that it rounds off slightly, that bottom part is rounded. So that's what we're going to do. There isn't just a line of darkness and then nothing, like there would be if it was a cube or a rectangle or something like that. Since this is rounded, it's more of that spherical shading where we're going to come in from the edge and slowly lighten up into the main part of the lobe. So just a lot of patience and just enjoy kind of the meditative sense of focusing on just this ear right now. In the rest of life, sometimes there's so much pressure to just get things done and quickly move through them. Drawing like this is almost an act of protest, where it's in the most positive form, choosing to not be rushed and to just be fully in the moment that you're in. And I believe it makes us better because of that. It gives us more patience. It strengthens our hand-eye coordination, our ability to recognize details. It calms us, our breathing changes. And as we continue strengthening all of the neural pathways in our brain, like the creative centers, it helps us as we go out into the world and have to problem solve. We come at things with different solutions and we see things not so black and white, but as a series of things just needing creative thinking. So I'm using pretty light pressure for the most part here. Really smoothing out these areas and also darkening them up in color a little bit. We're almost finished here, getting to the final few minutes. Just starting to step back, and what my eye is doing is constantly looking at my drawing, then the reference photo. Noticing anywhere where my drawing might have been off or that I need to imply a line in a different way through shadowing. And again, this is always fun too when you connect this to the rest of the face. You might have facial hair right here, or a hairline, jawline, things like that. But it's fun to just do this one little part. So if you have a blender, you can come in here. Otherwise, you can just watch and see, or use a cotton swab. And I'm starting with these darker parts. I'm just blurring them together a little bit. Working that pencil into the tooth of the paper. Working to smear it out just a hair. Again, looking at my reference photo, then my drawing, and just seeing what areas could use this, where some of the colors pulled in from the darker areas to the lighter, like I'm doing there. And which parts just need a little smoothing. And there's nothing wrong also with leaving the pencil sketch how it was. Sometimes I prefer the look where it's a little bit more, you can see the pencil strokes and everything isn't smoothed over perfectly. There's not one better than the other. I just like to show both options. So it's purely a preference of what you prefer. Again, just dragging up these lines. What this helps do also is we can start to see if there's anywhere where we've overlooked. It's kind of a scenario of like not being able to see the forest through the trees when you're so focused on the individual details. It's really important to step back then sometimes and take in the entire ear as one piece. So here with this cotton swab, I'm using this to just really pull a lot of this color or this pencil tone out into the other areas and darken that up a little bit, and as well as smoothing that into the tooth of the paper. So I'm not overdoing it. You want to make sure that you're not blurring this so much that it just looks like a smeared mess. You just want to gently use it to work that color in, or the pencil in. So we're making sure that outer C, we'll just call it, is a little bit darker, and we've done that. This inner part towards the eardrum is darker. And then that this part is shaded properly. We want to make sure that it's not bright white. There's a little bit of shading on there. But already within 20 minutes, you can see what we can do with shading like that. So here is the finished ear. If you have any questions about this process, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you'd give it a thumbs up. On the next lesson, we're going to draw an ear with a basic set of 12 colored pencils, just a regular Crayola box of school supplied pencils. And just continue this journey of exploring the features of the face. So I thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a really wonderful day. Bye now.